The chamber at Richmond Palace was hushed, as though the very air had grown afraid to stir. March winds rattled the windows, but inside, the Queen of England sat in silence, refusing both rest and comfort. Elizabeth Tudor, the Virgin Queen, who had outlived rivals and defied empires, no longer trusted her own bed. For hours she stood rigid in her chamber, her body frail, her eyes burning with fever. She would not lie down, for she believed that to surrender to the bed was to surrender to death. Her ladies covered the floor with cushions, knowing the moment would come when her legs gave way. It was not a question of if, only when. Her decline was pitiful to behold. The glittering woman who had charmed ambassadors and swayed armies with her words was gone. Her hair had fallen in clumps, her teeth long decayed, her once radiant face grown gaunt and gray. She refused to be washed. She refused to be tended. She recoiled from the touch of even her most faithful attendants. The stench of neglect clung to her, and courtiers who once jostled for a smile now recoiled in sorrow. She, who had commanded the love of a nation, seemed determined to die alone, upright, awake, unyielding. Whispers began to spread through the court, whispers that fear fed more than fact. Elizabeth Southwell, a lady-in-waiting, later wrote that a strange omen had been discovered upon the Queen's chair. A playing card pierced through with a nail. Some swore it was the mark of witchcraft, a curse upon the woman who had dared to reign without a king. But scholars today dismiss it as rumor, one of the many tales born of fear in those anxious final days. What cannot be denied is the atmosphere of dread. England had been ruled by Elizabeth for nearly half a century. Few could remember any other monarch. The people feared not only the loss of their queen, but the uncertain world that would follow her death. At last, after days of torment, Elizabeth collapsed onto the cushions her ladies had spread beneath her. She was carried to her bed, and in the early hours of March 24, 1603, her silence deepened into death. She had named no heir, yet all knew the crown must pass to James of Scotland, son of the woman she had executed. With her last breath, the great Tudor line ended. The queen who had defied the Spanish Armada, who had never yielded to pope nor prince, yielded finally to time itself. Her body was prepared for burial according to the custom of sovereigns. She was dressed in robes of state, her corpse sealed within a coffin lined with thick lead. The coffin was enormous, designed to preserve the body, to contain odor, to delay decay. Yet lead preserves nothing forever. It is heavy, it is strong. But within its walls, the body continues its silent transformation. Even in this, Elizabeth could not escape the fate of all mortals. London awaited her funeral with awe. On April 28th, the procession moved through the streets, a spectacle of grief and grandeur. The coffin was borne on a hearse drawn by horses draped in black velvet. Over it lay a purple cloth of state, and atop it rested a painted effigy of Elizabeth herself, crowned, robed, a scepter in her hand. So lifelike was the figure that onlookers gasped, some crying out, believing for a moment that their queen still watched over them. Chroniclers recorded that never had London witnessed such mourning. Windows overflowed, rooftops were crowded, gutters filled with faces straining for a glimpse. A sighing, groaning lament rose from the people as the coffin passed, the sound of a city grieving its sovereign. She was laid first in the vault of her grandfather, Henry VIII, beneath the stone of Westminster Abbey, but she would not remain there long. 3 years later, in 1606, her successor James ordered her remains moved to the north aisle of Henry VII's chapel to rest above the body of her half-sister Mary. The symbolism was unmistakable. Elizabeth the Protestant victor, Mary the Catholic persecutor. Elizabeth who had executed Mary, Queen of Scots, and Mary who had once executed Protestants in fire. In life they had been enemies, bound by blood but divided by faith. In death, James the Warren forced them into an intimacy that bordered on cruelty. Elizabeth's massive coffin was laid directly atop Mary's, pressing down upon her for centuries. Above, James commissioned a white marble monument to Elizabeth, carved with her likeness, inscribed with her triumphs. Mary's name was reduced to a footnote, her effigy absent, her reign overshadowed even in the grave. The inscription sought to soothe the bitterness of this arrangement. Partners in throne and grave. Here we sleep, Elizabeth and Mary, sisters in the hope of the resurrection. But the reality was far less peaceful. Two coffins stacked like a grotesque parody of sisterhood, one crushing the other, their bones forced together by the weight of royal politics. For more than 2 centuries, the vault lay sealed. The marble above told of glory, but the silence below held another story. Then, in 1869, curiosity disturbed the Queen once more. Dean Arthur Stanley of Westminster Abbey, armed with records that contradicted one another, sought to locate the long-lost tomb of James I. He received permission from Queen Victoria to open the vaults. On a cold February day, workmen lowered themselves beneath the stones, their pickaxes striking echoes in the dark. Torchlight revealed the stale air of centuries, thick with dust and something sharper, the odor of decay released after 200 years. There, beneath the chapel, they uncovered the lead coffins of Elizabeth and Mary. 2 great sarcophagi stacked like a double tomb, tarnished green with age. On Elizabeth's coffin, the carvings remained visible. The Tudor rose, initials, and dates that marked her passage. Yet alongside them were other marks, graffiti etched by a hand centuries before. One inscription bore the name John Weir, with the date 1645, the year James was buried there. A workman, a vandal, a thief. None could say. But the truth was undeniable. Even the coffin of a queen had not been secure. Strangers had stood in that vault, had touched the lead that sealed Elizabeth's remains, had scratched their names into her coffin. What else they had done was never recorded. Whispers returned of horror. Elizabeth Southwell had written long before that the Queen's corpse had swollen within her coffin, so filled with noxious vapors that it had burst. Many dismissed the tale as unreliable gossip, yet the fear it described was grounded in truth. Lead coffins, though meant to preserve, could become sealed chambers of rot. Flesh decomposed within, producing gases that had no escape. Pressure built until the coffin cracked or leaked. Other royal burials proved this was not impossible. When Edward IV's tomb was opened at Windsor, the remains were found floating in black liquid, the dissolved matter of flesh and wood. Elizabeth's coffin, massive and tightly sealed, was capable of the same grotesque fate. The Victorians spoke cautiously of what they saw. Stanley recorded his findings in the restrained prose of his age. He described Elizabeth's coffin as distinctly shaped in the form of the body, as though the lead itself had molded to her corpse, preserving its outline through centuries. He noted the graffiti, the tarnish, the weight, but he did not dwell on what else his senses must have told him. The odor of long decay, the pressure of time, the corruption of flesh sealed in metal. Victorian propriety demanded silence where curiosity wished to speak. What the marble monument concealed, the vault revealed. The Virgin Queen, crowned in stone above, was in truth a corroding coffin pressing down upon her rival sister. The effigy proclaimed majesty. The vault whispered of ruin. The story of Elizabeth's funeral was not one tale but two. One sung in daylight with trumpets and tears. The other buried in darkness, where bones lay in silence and lead bore the scars of human hands. The vault was small, the air suffocating, the torchlight dim. The men who pried open the stones in 1869 stepped into more than a tomb. They stepped into the intimate ruin of monarchs, a place where the weight of power was pressed into lead and forgotten by the living. Elizabeth's coffin lay above Mary's, immense, distorted, its outline faintly human, as though the Queen's figure was still imprinted upon the metal. Below, Mary's coffin sagged beneath centuries of pressure, their remains locked together in a silence neither sister would have chosen. Dean Arthur Stanley documented what he found with restraint. But between his lines, a darker picture emerges. The tarnished green of corroded lead, the graffiti of forgotten hands, the stale atmosphere thick with decay. He noted the inscriptions carved into Elizabeth's coffin, the Tudor rose, the initials, the dates of her reign, signatures preserved in metal. Yet he also recorded the crude scratch of John Weir, 1645. the mark of a trespasser who had stood where no subject should stand, who had left his name on the coffin of a queen. What else he left behind will never be known. In the 17th century, royal vaults were not the sanctuaries we imagine. Workmen entered them, relics were pilfered, bodies were disturbed. To scratch a name into a coffin was one thing. To take a lock of hair, a fragment of clothing, or worse, these were not unheard of. Elizabeth's coffin may have been touched, shifted, examined by hands that had no right to disturb her. Royalty had not shielded her from violation. In death, as in life, her body was a matter of politics and curiosity. The horror was not confined to Elizabeth. Across the centuries, the remains of kings and queens were treated with a casual cruelty that shocks modern sensibilities. Edward the Confessor, sainted and revered, was opened by Henry II in 1163. His body was found intact, dressed in cloth of gold. His pilgrim's ring was taken by the king as a relic, his garments divided into splendid vestments. The sanctity of his shrine mattered less than the prestige of possessing his relics. Duke Humphrey of Gloucester, buried at St. Albans, suffered worse. His embalming fluid was said to have magical powers, able to preserve youth. Visitors dipped their fingers, women rubbed it into their skin, physicians carried away thimbles of the substance for study. When the fluid was gone, they took locks of hair, nails, fragments of bone. His tomb became a shop for relics until almost nothing remained. Catherine de Valois, widow of Henry V, was displayed openly in Westminster Abbey. For centuries, her body was shown to visitors who paid for the privilege of gazing upon a queen's remains. The staff of the abbey turned her corpse into a spectacle, her coffin opened, her body propped for the curious to see. The majesty of a crown did not protect her. In death, she was merchandise. Such stories cast a sinister light upon the vault of Elizabeth. If lesser monarchs were handled with so little dignity, what confidence can we place that her remains were never touched, never tampered with, never profaned? The graffiti carved into her coffin is proof enough. Her lead casket was not inviolate. Her body was not beyond reach. Lead coffins themselves were treacherous things. They gave the illusion of preservation, but within, the process of decay only changed form. Sealed tight, the gases of decomposition built pressure. Histories whispered of corpses that burst within their metal prisons, the lids forced outward by the violence of rot. Elizabeth Southwell's claim that Elizabeth's coffin swelled and exploded was almost certainly an exaggeration, yet the science was not. Methane, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, all were produced in those sealed chambers. Pressure gathered and coffins split or seeped. In other tombs, liquid remains were found pooled at the base, a black fluid of flesh and wood dissolved into one. Imagine Mary's coffin below, sagging beneath the immense weight of Elizabeth's lead casket. For more than 2.5 centuries, Mary's bones bore the burden of her rival sister. The symbolism is unmistakable. Elizabeth crushed her enemy in life through fire and execution. In death, she crushed her still, pressing her coffin into the silence of the vault. Above, James III had raised a monument that concealed the truth. Carved from marble, painted in rich colors, Elizabeth's effigy lay regal and serene. She wore a crimson robe, lined with ermine, an orb in her hand, lions at her feet. The paint has long faded, the gilding vanished. But in its time, the monument was brilliant, a vision of eternal sovereignty. Tourists and mourners looked upon it and believed Elizabeth reigned still in stone. But beneath that monument lay the reality, a corroding coffin, a body compressed by lead, a vault where bones pressed against bones, where silence spoke louder than ceremony. Marble told one story, lead told another. The world above proclaimed majesty. The darkness below revealed the truth, that even queens decay, that power dies, that monuments are masks hiding the ruin beneath. Victorian sensibilities softened these discoveries. Stanley described the scene with discretion, omitting what he must have seen, smelt, and felt in that vault. The Victorians delighted in monuments, but shied from decay. They praised Elizabeth's reign, but left unspoken the grotesque intimacy of her coffin pressing upon Mary's. The official record was calm. The reality was horror. Even centuries after her death, Elizabeth was not allowed rest. In 1975, her effigy was altered again, adorned with a gilded collar and pendant. Her image was adjusted to suit the times, as though even in stone she could not be left as she was. Her body beneath remained untouched, sealed in lead, but her effigy above was dressed anew, manipulated to preserve her as eternal. The contradiction remained, what the eye saw above, what the earth concealed below. In life, Elizabeth had controlled her image with care. She painted herself as the Virgin Queen, chosen by God, pure, eternal, invincible. Her portraits showed youth long after her body had aged. Her courtly pageants turned her into a goddess of sovereignty. She ruled through spectacle as much as through law. In death, her image was still crafted, painted in stone, dressed in jewelry, presented as regal. Yet all the while, beneath, she decayed. The Virgin Queen, the Lion of England, became flesh and gas, bone and dust, and palm. This is the truth of monarchy, stripped of ceremony. The effigy proclaims, but the coffin contradicts. The tomb celebrates, but the vault corrodes. The people mourn, but the body dissolves. In Elizabeth's case, the contradiction is sharper than most. Above her, glory. Beneath her, silence, violation, decay. And still, visitors walk the aisles of Westminster Abbey, gazing at marble effigies, unaware of the darkness below. Centuries have passed, yet Elizabeth still lies in that vault, her coffin pressing upon her sisters, her effigy gazing in marble silence above. Time corrodes lead, softens stone, wears away memory. But the story her tomb tells is not one of rest. It is one of power lingering beyond death, of politics carved into burial, of humanity crushed beneath ceremony. The effigy is serene, but the lead beneath is scarred. The Tudor rose carved by careful hands endures, but beside it are the scratches of John Weir, a nameless intruder who carved himself into Elizabeth's afterlife. His graffiti is not simply vandalism, it is a reminder that the veil between reverence and desecration is thin. Queens may be mourned with tears and trumpets, yet in darkness they can be handled like curiosities, scratched, opened, violated. Elizabeth had declared she bore the heart and stomach of a king. She had defied the might of Spain, extinguished rebellion, executed rivals. Yet she could not defy the slow chemistry of her own body sealed in lead. She could not prevent her coffin being pressed down upon Mary's. She could not protect her remains from the eyes and hands of strangers. Time is the great equalizer, and death strips every monarch of the illusion of permanence. Still, her image endured. The Virgin Queen as goddess, as warrior, as eternal sovereign. Painters immortalized her, courtiers glorified her, James raised her in marble. The Elizabeth remembered above ground was youth eternal, power unbroken, divinity unchallenged. The Elizabeth below ground was flesh rotting, bones compressing, gases swelling, lead corroding. One Elizabeth was myth, the other was truth. What do we choose to remember? The thunder of her funeral procession, the lifelike effigy that made mourners gasp, the marble monument still gazed upon in the abbey, or the silence of the vault, the corroding coffin, the grotesque intimacy of two sisters bound together in death. In that silence lies a warning. Power fades, splendor crumbles, monuments lie. Beneath every crown there is bone. Beneath every robe there is decay. Elizabeth's story is magnificent, but her tomb is a reminder that magnificence cannot escape mortality. Today, as footsteps echo through Westminster Abbey, visitors admire the stone beauty of the Queen's effigy. Few think of the vault below, where coffins of lead still lie, tarnished and scarred, bearing graffiti, bearing weight. But if you could descend, if you could stand in that chamber and look upon Elizabeth's coffin, would you feel awe or unease? Would you see the triumph of the Virgin Queen, or would you see only lead, only corrosion, only the silence that consumes all? The woman who never bowed in life lies forever horizontal in death. The queen who never shared her throne is now joined inseparably to her sister. The sovereign who controlled her image lies reduced to what no crown, no monument, no effigy can disguise: flesh, bone, and the silence of time. And so Elizabeth waits still, in darkness, beneath marble and memory. her coffin pressing down, her effigy gazing upward, her story divided between glory and ruin. She is remembered, yet she is forgotten. She is eternal, yet she is dust. If stone could whisper, if lead could speak, what stories would they tell of the queen who defied the world and yet could not defy decay?